Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gents. This is Defub21, and I have just watched the seventh episode of the current season, season 3 of The Mandalorian, twice. So I could give you this review. My thoughts on this episode is it is one of the better episodes of the season. It is also correspondingly, surprise surprise, one of the longest episodes of the season. It's about 50 minutes long thereabouts, which means the you're not getting the highly truncated storytelling you're seeing in other episodes this season of The Mandalorian. This inevitably means that there is an awful lot less corner cutting in terms of how the story is told. In other words, things aren't being ultra compressed because of ridiculously short run times, considering what for the episode, considering what the story that has to be gotten through. The prime example of this is that 30-minute episode we saw earlier on in the season, where it was just like it was bad even by the standards of the animated series in terms of, or the in terms of the animated shows, in terms of, chopping things down as much as they possibly can to get things to fit within an extremely limited runtime. On top of that, you've got plenty of action this episode, and you have the return of Moff Gideon, which is again good. You have the return of the actress playing the Imperial officer slash spy on Coruscant at the beginning of the episode. Again, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, so I won't even bother to try, or the name of the character for that matter. I apologize for that. It's I think overall the use of the volume isn't, as noticeable. I mean, there are some people out there been complaining about its use, and there are certain sequences where that's certainly the case. They could be doing a lot more location shooting than they're actually doing, which again is obviously they're trying to use the volume instead to save money. I think it hurts the quality of the show. But here again, in the kind of like very kind of alien environments where it would either be very, very expensive to build a set, even by streaming show standards, to pull it off successfully, or it would require kind of some rather extreme location shooting to get anywhere near close what they can do in the volume. As long as it's, shot properly, I think it's acceptable to use it, and it certainly is a better alternative to traditional green screen. But outside of that, it's become a liability. It became a liability immediately in the movies, the Marvel movies, and they need to use it as sparingly as possible in their streaming shows. And when they do use it, and they use it improperly, or they try to use it instead of location shooting, it makes the shows, not just the Mandalorian but other shows on Disney Plus, look and feel cheap. In terms of, again, this episode, we got to see some it's a long episode by this season standards, so there's not a lot of, overly compressed storytelling or corner cutting, as I've already said, on each episode, or on this episode, in terms of the story and the writing. But it is an action filled episode. The Mandalorians are trying to begin the process of retaking Mandalore and permanently resettling it. But there are parts of the episode that, there are elements of it that I think, just don't work very well or hurt the show. The new Imperial stormtroopers turning up with wearing Mandalorian armor, or Beskar based armor, is initially quite cool. But when you quickly realize they're just as inept as regular stormtroopers or close to it, it's the action sequences, frankly, and the fight sequences, but involving the Mandalorians and the Imperial forces in this episode, are, to my view, particularly when it comes to the hand-to-hand combat stuff, are simply not as well shot or choreographed slash directed as they could be. Just the number of Mandalorians that keep getting killed this season, there's been a lot of them killed, and that's not necessarily unexpected. But where they get, like, there's supposed to be relatively few of them left. Where are they getting their reinforcements from? And again, it's becoming kind of, like, give you a kind of a comparison. It's like Star Trek Voyager, where they just seem to have an unlimited supply of space shuttles. even though they have no connection to Starfleet and no ability to notionally to replace them. But outside of that, you've got the fighting between the Imperial forces and the Mandalorians is not as good as it could or should be, considering the kind of resources Disney has at its disposal. The action sequences could be better shot, better choreographed. The stunts could be of a better quality, again, considering the resources that should be going into the show. The particular kind of annoying thing for me this episode, and in hindsight looking at the rest of the season to date, should not have been a surprise, is what happens to Paz Vizsla, who has been kind of the principal antagonist from within the Mandalorian culvert, as it were, for Din Djarin from season 1 up until now. The character has been through what I would consider by current television standards an old-fashioned, poorly put together, badly put together story arc this season, which has gone from him being kind of an antagonist slash enemy fighting Din Djarin over the fighting Mando over possession of the Darksaber not in season 2 of The Mandalorian, but in what we assume is the only season of the Book of Boba Fett, in the couple of the episodes where Din Djarin turns up in that show, and was certainly in that position at the beginning of this season as well. In other words, still kind of an antagonist for Din Djarin. But over the course of the season, there have been a couple of episodes which appear to have been clearly set up at this point in a very ineffective and kind of unsubtle way to change the character's relationship to Din and to Mando and to Bo-Katan, specifically to explain away his actions later on in the season. Specifically him siding with Din Djarin and Bo-Katan to go help chase away the space or defeat the space pirates, and then his valiant sacrifice at the end of the episode, leaving his, one assumes, orphaned son to fend for himself. That makes even less sense when you take into account that. And it was done in a kind of very kind of ham-fisted 1990s kind of to 2000s kind of episodic television way, where the relationship was basically changed kind of over literally just one episode, where his son is saved by Jin and by Bo-Katan from the space pterodactyl, shall we say, in an earlier one, actually I think the shortest episode of the season so far, and probably one of its worst. And it comes across as kind of fake for that reason. It's not the people writing this season either don't know how to write serialized television, or they were in such a kind of condensed period of time to write the season, which is a bit odd considering the season was, I believe, delayed. Its production was delayed. That they've handled it in a very, very ham-fisted manner. If Paz Vizsla was always planned to, die heroically in the second to last episode of the season, they really needed to kind of have the character in place, more active, more visible, with his associated kind of, what's the word for it, his storyline running from really the first episode of the season all the way to the current episode, which they could have done, because again, there's a lot of stuff that you could have, chopped out of the first episode, or things you could have added to the first episode, the second episode. Again, we're seeing very kind of weird and extreme variation in episode length, which says to me that they had a specific amount of money. They couldn't spend more than that, and so they weren't able to do proper storytelling across the board. So we've now had 2 episodes, by far the best episode of the season in my view, both of which are 50 minutes plus long. And then we've had episodes. The worst episode of the season is barely a half an hour long, including both the previously on sequence at the beginning of the episode and the credits reel at the very end of the episode. So in other words, shorter probably than a typical run of an episode of the Bad Batch, of the second season of the Bad Batch, which is bad. and the other episodes have been barely 40 minutes, maybe a little bit more than that. And again, the truncated, the very short length of the episodes, the very truncated, very kind of episodic storytelling means they just weren't able to do this to the standard necessary. This character's, story arc should have been running from at least the second episode, preferably the first, all the way to the point at which he dies, and that simply wasn't done. And that is, quite frankly, a huge problem. It's poor in a modern premium streaming service, House of the Dragon kind of world that we're living in. It's simply not good enough, and it's hurting the show. And again, they desperately need to, begin the process of really meaningfully rebuilding from, the disaster that was The Last Jedi, the disaster that was Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the very poor to mediocre Book of Boba Fett, at least with a couple of Mando episodes in it that were comparatively good. This is, we're not seeing that quality here. The writing isn't there. The Disney appears to be unwilling to, put together a 8 to 10 episode season with, 45 to 50 minute plus long episodes as standard. And this is just another case of it. They needed to have this character's story arc built into probably the very beginning of the season. The same is true with the female Imperial officer / spy. Was it episode 3 or episode 4 that basically stars her? I can't remember off the top of my head, and my apologies. But that was 50 minutes long. That story sequence set on Coruscant that took up the bulk of that episode should have been chopped up into pieces, and in terms of that from a writing standpoint, and should have been present in episode 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5 as well. And it hasn't been. And that's again, it's a huge problem. The same is true with Paz Vizsla. He should have had a story arc told in pieces throughout the entire run of the season to the point at which he goes down fighting. That doesn't happen. Hurts the storytelling. It's just not good enough. They're wasting money as far as I'm concerned. They're producing too much quantity between this and kind of the Marvel shows, and not enough quality. And it's if the ratings appear to be falling off a cliff, which they do appear to be, based on what I'm seeing out there on the interwebs, then quite frankly they've not even begun the work of rebuilding the Star Wars IP, which they really need to. I didn't do a reaction video to the Ahsoka show trailer that was shown off at a Star Wars celebration. My apologies, I was busy. But if that suffers from the same problems that this does, Star Wars is going nowhere fast. Anyway, this is Defub21. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so. And please like the video, and please ring the bell so you get notifications every time I put something new up, so you can immediately find out my thoughts on whatever I'm covering. This is Defub21 signing off. Toodaloo.